I wasn't supposed to find this. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind where the air feels thick enough to drink, and the rain comes down in a fine, relentless mist. I had been sent to the basement archives of the county courthouse, a place no one visited unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. The light overhead buzzed with a low, insect hum, casting its pale cone onto rows of warped shelving. Everything smelled of paper turned to mulch and leather sweating in its own decay. I wasn't there for anything sinister. A clerical error had buried an 1887 land record, and the city wanted it pulled for a survey. My hands were black with mildew and old ink when I slid a box toward me and felt its weight shift, not evenly, but as if something loose rolled inside. The box wasn't labeled, not like the others. No date, no index number. Just a single word burned into its spine in block serif, Pritchard. Inside was a ledger. The cover was bloated and warped, a hide of calfskin puckered like the skin of a corpse left too long in water. The pages inside were brittle but strangely clean, as though they'd been sealed from air until now. Most were neatly lined with inked columns, names, dates, and what looked like marital records. But something was off. Besides certain names, a faint diagonal slash ran through the ink, so lightly drawn it might have been a tremor of the pen. I began noticing a pattern. Every slashed name was a woman. And every date beside those names matched a wedding day. The same surname repeated in the groom's column over and over, Pritchard. My fingertips prickled. At first I thought it was some genealogical quirk, an over-recorded family line. But the more I turned the pages, the stranger it became. The wedding stopped after 1928 abruptly. No divorces noted, no deaths recorded. Just the slash, again and again. Halfway through the ledger, the handwriting changed. More cramped, more hurried. Entire pages had been violently blacked out, the ink so thick it had bled through and glued the sheets together. On one page where the blackout was incomplete, I caught the ghost of a single sentence bleeding through, "No bride was seen the morning after." In the gutter of the ledger's spine, faint but unmistakable, a number had been scratched into the leather with something sharp, 11. It didn't feel like a page number. It felt like a mark. Something about it, the neat regularity of the columns, the violent defacement, the eerie repetition of the Pritchard name, began to press on me in a way I can't explain. The air in that basement felt heavier, denser, as if it had noticed me. My breathing quickened, and each exhale came back to me in a muted echo from the far corner of the room, where no light reached. I wanted to put the ledger back. I wanted to climb the stairs and pretend I had never seen it. But I couldn't. The questions had already begun to grow in me, and questions like these rot you from the inside if you leave them unanswered. I told myself I would only look a little further, just enough to understand. But that was a lie. From the moment I touched that ledger, I knew I had already stepped across some quiet, invisible line. The ledger led me to a name, Pritchard Institute for the Betterment of Women. It appeared only twice in the county's online archives, both in yellowed newspaper clippings from 1893 and 1901. The articles were brittle fragments of small-town pride, the kind of civic puff pieces that mistake gilded facades for virtue. According to the papers, the Institute was a finishing school for the cultivation of feminine grace and moral refinement, founded by Reverend Jonathan Pritchard, a man whose jawline in the photographs could have been carved from marble. He stood beside rows of young women in stiff white dresses, his hand resting lightly on a Bible, eyes fixed on some far-off horizon like a man who had already glimpsed heaven. The school, they wrote, prepared daughters for the sacred duty of marriage, ensuring our community's most promising unions. Officially, the Pritchard Institute operated for 43 years. Unofficially, it appears to have functioned as a closed loop. Digging deeper, I found that no alumna could be traced beyond her wedding day. Their maiden names dissolved into that ledger's slashes. Census rolls showed them alive one year, gone the next, no burial records, no migration notices, no remarriages. The Institute's grounds once stood just outside Marowak Township, a 2-hour drive from where I sat with my notes spread across the kitchen table. The land now belongs to a grain processing company, its factory swallowing the last trace of the old gardens. But county maps from 1912 showed a sprawling campus, dormitories, a small chapel, a greenhouse, even a locked east wing noted only as private use. Through a fragile manila folder labeled Building Permits, Religious Institutions, I uncovered letters between the Institute and the County Board. They were written on embossed stationery in Reverend Pritchard's slanted script, full of appeals to safeguard the virtue of our charges and protect the sanctity of their transition into holy matrimony. The tone was paternal, bordering on ownership. One letter in particular stopped me cold. It was dated March 4, 1909, just months before a mass withdrawal of public funds. Upon the eve of their binding, each young woman must enter seclusion to receive the blessing in its fullness. No one is permitted to see them again until the covenant is complete. This is not a cruelty but an act of preservation. There was no explanation of what the blessing entailed. When I called the State Historical Society, a soft-voiced archivist named Marianne hesitated before answering my questions. She told me she had handled Institute records before, but they were unusually incomplete, not just missing documents, but erasures inside the documents themselves. She finally admitted, in a voice so low I had to strain to hear, "You won't find anyone who graduated." That's the thing. Once they went in, they were gone. They didn't leave for other towns or states. They just stopped. Reverend Pritchard died in 1928, the same year the ledger's entries ended. His obituary was brief, almost perfunctory. No mention of a wife or children, no funeral photograph. Just one sentence that felt more like a benediction than a farewell: "He has fulfilled the covenant in its entirety." I sat with that sentence for a long time. The language of faith has a way of softening horrors, folding them into ceremony until you forget they're horrors at all. But whatever had happened in that place, whatever blessing had been promised, it had left behind a void wide enough to swallow decades of women whole. I thought I would find stories of missing women. Instead, I found stories of women who forgot they had ever existed. It began in a locked cabinet at the Merriwick Historical Society. The archivist, Marianne, had trusted me with a key after I promised, perhaps too quickly, that I wouldn't remove anything from the building. Inside were bundles of letters, tied with cotton ribbons so frayed it came apart in my hands. Each letter was from a different woman. At least, that's what I assumed until I read them closely. Different handwritings, yes, neat loops, sharp strokes, hesitant curls, but the words were the same. Each one began with "My days here are filled with improvement" and ended with "I am becoming the wife he deserves." The middle paragraphs varied slightly, mentioning sewing classes or devotional readings, but the cadence was identical. Too identical. In the margins of some, faint impressions suggested another letter had been written on top of them, the ghost of sentences that didn't match. One, when I tilted it toward the light, revealed something in hurried script: "I am forgetting my own name." I began collecting more fragments: a class portrait from 1903 where every girl's hair was parted the same way, every bow tied at the exact same angle. Their expressions were identical too, not blank, but fixed, as if holding a practiced thought in their heads. Beneath the photograph, the names were etched in marble on the frame, then crudely scratched away with something sharp. One account came from a groundskeeper's diary, dated 1915, found in the estate sale of a man named Wilfred Kane. He mentioned brides in the East Wing who stare as if they've forgotten the word for window. He described delivering food trays and finding them untouched, the women instead sitting at their desks, copying lines from books into notebooks. The same sentence, over and over: "My purpose is to please." It wasn't just the women who faded. The institution itself seemed to erase its own edges. Census records listed the same staff for decades, though most were given only a single initial and surname: S. Porter M. Ellis, making them untraceable. In an interview with a local priest, Father Anders, who claimed to have visited the institute as a boy, I heard the first living voice that broke the official narrative. He remembered being brought there with his mother to deliver hymnals. While waiting in the chapel, a young woman approached him and whispered, "Don't answer when they ask your name. It won't be yours anymore." Before he could respond, another woman appeared, smiling too broadly, and led her away. There were no birthdays recorded for any of the women, only the date of their admittance and, in a column labeled "Fulfillment," the date they were married. The word fulfillment was written in ornate, flowing script, as if to disguise its finality. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Every signpost pointed toward a system designed to strip identity until nothing was left but a roll, and even that was temporary. I returned to the ledger from the courthouse basement. On the first page, beneath the neat black ink, I now noticed faint indentations from an earlier draft. I traced them with my fingers until I could make out the words, names or shadows. Shadows do not keep. That night, as I reviewed my notes, I realized I had written bride number 11 in the margin where I meant to write her name. The name was in my head, I knew it an hour ago, but now it was gone. Just gone. And for the first time, I understood that whatever had happened in that place wasn't just history. It could still reach you. The Institute's surface story was clean, polished wood floors, whitewashed dormitories, well-tended gardens. But the deeper I dug into maps and construction permits, the more I saw lines that didn't fit. Hallways that began on one blueprint and vanished on the next. An elevator shaft registered in 1911 that appeared to have no mechanical function. I had to see it for myself. Marwick Grain's factory now stands where the Institute once rose, its corrugated metal walls and steady hum disguising any trace of the past. But an access tunnel still exists beneath the loading bays, originally part of the old root cellar. Marianne came with me, against her better judgment, carrying a flashlight and the nervous habit of touching the silver cross at her neck. The air inside was colder than October should allow. Our footsteps echoed in strange, layered ways, as though another set of steps followed us a fraction of a beat later. The tunnel narrowed, then opened into a corridor faced with the original plaster, flaking away in pale strips like shedding skin. We found a door marked East Wing Storage. Its lock was rusted but gave under Marianne's pry bar. Behind it, stairs spiraled down far deeper than the building's original plans allowed. The deeper we went, the more the air thickened with a sweet, medicinal scent, laudanum, if my years in historical research were worth anything. At the bottom, the space widened into a chamber no larger than a chapel. The walls were lined with alcoves, each containing a narrow bed and a single chair. The beds were bolted to the floor. Faded straps still hung from the headboards. A ledger lay open on a podium in the center, each page noting only a date and a single word, sealed. On one wall, a series of black and white photographs had been nailed directly into the plaster. Each showed the same young woman in a plain gown, her face progressively slackening over 5 images until her expression was vacant. In the final frame, she was sitting upright in bed, eyes open, a candle burning in front of her. The photograph's surface bore a faint ripple, as if the emulsion had never fully dried. We moved deeper, finding a narrower passage lined with tiny, square windows, though they didn't look outside. Instead, they opened onto other rooms. Inside them, the floor plans seemed wrong, the proportions off. A bed might be 3 times longer than its occupant, or a door set 6 feet above the floor with no way to reach it. In one room, a mirror hung crooked on the wall. As I stepped in front of it, my flashlight beam caught movement, lips forming words I couldn't hear, though my own mouth was still. Marianne swore she saw smoke curling from its frame, though I smelled nothing. We reached the farthest chamber, its walls stained dark and irregular, rising lines, as if something inside had pressed outward and bled through. In the center was a ring of low stools, each with a shallow copper basin at its foot. On the wall behind them, words had been carved into the plaster and then painted over in white: "The blessing is not given. It is taken." The sound came then, not loud, not sudden, but steady. A soft inhalation, like many people breathing in unison somewhere just out of sight. And in the stale air, I thought I saw the candle from the photograph flicker to life on the podium behind us. It was naive to think the Pritchard Institute was an isolated cruelty. Back in my apartment, I laid out the photographs, letters, and copied ledger entries across the floor until my living room looked like a crime board. Somewhere in the mess, there was a pattern I hadn't yet seen. It started with the crest. I had noticed it earlier, a delicate filigree of ivy surrounding a stylized key stamped on the Institute stationery. It meant nothing to me until I spotted the exact same crest in the corner of an unrelated file from 1919, the registry for the Caleb Wright Seminary for the Advancement of Young Ladies, over 200 miles away. The Wright Seminary's records mirrored Pritchard's down to the language: "Our mission is to prepare daughters for the sacred duty of marriage." Their ledgers carried the same diagonal slashes beside names, the same abrupt stops in the record. Even the fulfillment column matched. Curiosity hardened into dread as I kept digging. Old state maps revealed at least 6 similar institutions, each in different counties but all operating between 1880 and 1930. The names varied: East Haven Conservatory, St. Audley's School for Girls, Belvoir Home for Refined Women, but the architecture, rituals, and vocabulary were identical. A hidden registry tied them together. I found it buried in the archives of the defunct Marowak Tribune, in a bound volume of advertisements and classifieds. At first glance, it was just a directory of charitable organizations. But each entry carried a subtle code, a Roman numeral beside the town name, always between I and 12. The Pritchard Institute was 11. Wright Seminary was 8. The directory's final page bore a signature I didn't recognize at first: Lydia Harrow, Secretary of the Fifth Veil. The Order of the Fifth Veil. It sounded like a piece of cheap Gothic fiction, but cross-referencing the name brought up minutes from a women's philanthropic club in Boston, a court transcript from a defamation suit in Ohio, and, disturbingly, my own great-grandmother's name on a guest list for a veil dinner in 1924. The implications turned my mouth dry. My family had lived in this state for generations, but my great-grandmother's life was largely undocumented. All I'd ever heard from my father was that she married well and moved east. I dug out a shoebox of old family photos from the back of my closet. One image made my hands go cold: a sepia group shot of women at a long banquet table. At the head sat a figure in a veil, thin, gauzy, just enough to blur her features. To her right, my great-grandmother stared ahead with the same fixed, placid expression I'd seen in the Institute's portraits. On the back of the photo, in faint pencil, 11 convenes with 4 and 8. All daughters accounted for. It was no longer possible to see the Institute as a dead relic. This was a network, deliberate, structured, and sanctioned, that had spanned decades and counties, with a central authority overseeing fulfillments across multiple sites. The symbols still surfaced in modern places. I found the IVNK crest embossed on the invitation for a private gala hosted just last year by the Lydia Harrow Foundation, now rebranded as a non-profit dedicated to advancing opportunities for young women. If the order had survived a century under shifting names and fronts, there was no reason to think it had stopped its work. The question now wasn't what had happened in Marowak. It was where it was happening right now, and who among the living knew enough to keep it quiet. It came to me in an unmarked envelope slid beneath my apartment door. Inside was a single flash drive and a note: "For your eyes, before you decide." The drive contained one video file, its timestamp from 2 weeks ago. The footage was grainy, black and white, clearly from a surveillance camera. The setting was an austere room, bare walls, a single wooden chair. In it sat a girl, maybe 12, hair neatly braided, hands folded in her lap. A woman's voice, off-camera, spoke softly: "You will forget your old name now." The girl hesitated. "Will it matter if I get out?" Silence. Then, faintly, the scrape of a chair moving closer. "You won't want to get out." The recording ended abruptly, replaced by a folder of scanned documents. They were current ledgers with dates from this year. And there it was again, the fulfillment column, the slashes, the Roman numerals. In the header, Order of the Fifth Veil, internal record, 12. This wasn't over. It had never been over. I took the files to Marianne. We met in her kitchen, curtains drawn, the air thick with the smell of black coffee and rain. She listened without interrupting, then pushed a manila envelope toward me. Inside were handwritten names and addresses. Survivors. Women who had gotten out, years or decades ago, and had quietly built new lives under assumed identities. "If you expose this," Marianne said, "they'll be found. They'll be dragged back, if not by the order, then by the weight of what's in their past. You'll burn them with the truth." I stared at the list, recognizing one name. My father's cousin, a woman we never spoke of. The thought of her being pulled into the light like a specimen made my stomach turn. But if I bury it, I couldn't finish the sentence. We both knew what it meant. Marianne reached across the table, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes the only mercy is forgetting." That night, I drove to the river with the original records, the ledgers, the banquet photograph, even the shoebox from my closet. My headlights lit the skeletal branches along the bank, the water below black and without reflection. I could still hear the girl's voice from the video, "Will it matter if I get out?" And another, fainter voice in my memory, my great-grandmother's, from a recording I'd found years ago. I'd thought it was a lullaby at the time, but now the words seemed different. A prayer. Or a promise. The matchbook felt small in my hand. I lit one and held it to the first ledger page. The flame took quickly, curling the paper into black petals. I burned every page, every photograph, until the embers glowed low. Then I reached into my coat pocket and withdrew a single item I had kept back, the 1909 letter from Reverend Pritchard, with its line about the blessing. I slid it into my desk drawer when I got home, not locked away but not destroyed either. A quiet, dangerous seed. In the corner of my desk, a candle burned low. I lit it. When I finally blew it out, the wick glowed a moment longer than it should have, as if something inside the wax was still breathing. An electrical fault in the disused grain facility, flames fed by decades of dry timber and forgotten insulation. The blaze burned hot enough to warp steel and collapse the upper floors. By the time the fire department contained it, only the concrete footings remained, blackened and skeletal against the morning sky. The official report made no mention of underground chambers. No ledgers, no photographs, no carved words beneath white paint. The fire marshal's statement was careful, the lower levels were inaccessible due to instability. I read those lines over and over, knowing inaccessible meant something else. In the days that followed, the county announced the site would be filled and paved for use as an equipment lot. Insurance settlements were swift. No investigation into the building's past was launched. And just like that, the institute and everything buried beneath it was gone from public memory. Almost everything. A crewman from the cleanup team came to see me privately, his cap twisted in his hands. "They told us to clear out anything small," he said, "but I found this in a crack under the stairs. Didn't seem right to throw it in the bin." He slid it across the table. A child's locket. Tarnished silver, no bigger than my thumb. On the front, the IDNK crest, worn smooth. Inside, 2 photos so faded they were almost gone, a girl in a plain dress, and opposite her, only the faint outline of another face, erased by time or by intent. I held it in my palm, feeling the cold weight of it, the hinge that still worked after all these years. The county records office issued a statement a week later: no historically significant materials were recovered from the site. All surviving paper records from the institute, they claimed, had been lost in the fire. Except I knew some had been misfiled, perhaps deliberately deep and unrelated collections. Names folded into census books from the wrong decade, dates rewritten in school rosters, birth certificates quietly reassigned. I'd seen enough in my months of digging to know that erasure wasn't the absence of evidence, but the presence of the wrong evidence in its place. I tried to tell myself I had done what I could. That burning my own collection of records had protected the survivors, just as Marianne had begged me to. But in the silence of my apartment, the decision felt less like protection and more like complicity. On the night before the demolition crews poured the first load of concrete over the ruins, I drove to the site. The air still smelled faintly of char, though the rain had been steady all day. I took the locket from my pocket and placed it in the mud at the edge of the lot, just beyond where the new asphalt would end. I didn't bury it. I left it where someone, someday, might find it. The candle on my desk was cold when I returned home. I lit it again, not for light, but to watch the flame. I wasn't supposed to find this, I thought. And now that I had, it would never stop finding me.